All right. Hello and welcome to the Imagine Belonging at Work podcast brought to you by Rhodes Perry Consulting. I'm your host, Rhodes Perry. And today I am very, very excited for our topic, which is Not Your Father's Workplace, the essential role that men play in advancing gender equality. So, a little bit of context before I introduce our guest. So we're living in a world right now that seems to really be struggling with embracing the beauty, the complexities, and the possibilities of gender. And so it's not surprising that big figures like Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg recently called for, quote, more masculine energy in corporate America. So that callous statement that he made, it was made on the Joe Rogan Experience a couple of weeks ago, and it sparked controversy and certainly ignited crucial conversations on the topic. His comments about masculinity suggest that corporate culture has become, quote, too feminine, and that a celebration of aggression is needed. Now, this perspective, it perpetuates harmful stereotypes about what it means to be masculine, and it reinforces what some know as toxic masculinity, and that is a set of behaviors linked to violence, homophobia, and the devaluation of women. Recent research by the American Psychological Association reveals that toxic masculinity isn't just detrimental to workplace culture and inclusion efforts, it's also harmful to us men ourselves, right? It's an outdated model of masculinity and it limits emotional expression, it promotes unhealthy competition, and it restricts the full spectrum of our human experience. So today I'm really looking forward to chatting with Adam Siegel, who I'll introduce in just a moment, to kind of talk about a new framework around masculinities. Sometimes it's known as multiple masculinities or new masculinities. And essentially, it is a framework that embraces diverse expressions of masculinity, including those that generously diverge from the limited behaviors of toxic masculinity. And we believe that by embracing a broader understanding of masculinity, organizational leaders inside of the workplace can benefit. We can usher in more inclusive and authentic leadership styles that benefits everyone, people who express their genders in lots of different ways. So, to delve deeper, I'm super excited to introduce Adam to the show. He's the founder and facilitator of New Masculinities, and Adam is dedicated to critical conversations around gender, sexuality, and masculinity through an intersectional feminist lens. And he brings a wealth of experience facilitating men's groups, conducting male accountability work, and promoting anti racism efforts. So, this conversation, it's a conversation designed for leaders like yourself. Even if you kind of push that title away, if you're watching this, you have a vision, you're a visionary leader, and I'm excited that you're here. So if you enjoy podcast episodes like these, definitely check out our Belonging membership community where you can connect with our guest one-on-one after these live recordings. So if you're interested in that, you can just visit rhodesperry.com and you'll get connected to all of that information. So with that, Adam, I'm super excited that you're here. It's nice to have you back. We've done a couple of other interviews related to this topic, and Mark Zuckerberg's recent comment just adds some grist to the mill for like more content to talk about, I guess. So I wanted to kick off, one just to welcome you and kind of shine a light on the fact that you've dedicated your career, your work to exploring and redefining masculinity. And so my question for you and for the audience, really to get a sense of who you are is what initially drew you to this work? And as you've been doing the work for quite some time, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you encounter about masculinity when you share with people what you do and maybe some of the reactions that they have?
Thanks, Rhodes. It's really good to be here. And yeah, like you said, we've talked about this a couple times over the past few years. And, not only is there renewed need for men to be talking about this, I also feel like, my views and are shaping and evolving around how we talk about this stuff, to meet the needs of the current disastrous political moment. And so, yeah, we'll probably reveal some new things. And I think, on that note, one thing I want to start with is that I used to talk about this kind of as like a joking addendum to like how I got into this work, but I really kind of think it's important to start here, which is that I got into new healthy masculinities from a place of self-interest. And I want to start by saying I don't think that self-interest is fundamentally a shameful or bad word. I think it's actually really important for anyone who is an organizer or a DEI practitioner to be able to lean on and plug into people's self-interest as a way of motivating them for lasting change. And I guess to kind of be more specific about my own experience, I probably like many men grew up not really loving what boys were said to be and what men were said to have to be. I was a, big, soft, chubby, sensitive boy who cried a lot, and the way that men teased each other when we were kids was a lot of like the person who felt it the most deeply was the one who got ridiculed the most, and so a lot of my youth was being angry at friends, but also loving them. And that kind of confusion of the people you felt safest with and loved the most were also really cruel and mean to you. And I didn't really like, I wanted people to understand how I was hurting, but I didn't want to hurt anyone. And I'm sure I also like was cruel to people in turn in attempts to like, provide and generate safety and social capital for myself. And yeah, I think like I grew up thinking that I would not actually succeed in being what I was told a man was. And so I think part of this comes from a place of needing to find a path to love and appreciate myself. And I thought that meant that I would have to be something other than a man. And, lately have come to realize that it is better and more empowering to know that I am a man after much reflection, and know that what a man is can be expansive, because almost nobody can fit the really narrow ideas of gender that we tend to receive in our dominant American Western white supremacist culture. So that's kind of what I'll say about myself. And the second part of your question was about misconceptions. And I think it's hard for me to speak about like individual misconceptions, but I do think it's important to note that there is, I think, an overall lack of cohesion and clarity about what men are, about who men are, about who men want to be. Um, and I think there's an additional layer of there's also confusion about what women, non-binary folks want from the men in their lives. I think like the question of what we want from men as neighbors is different than what we want from men as lovers. And I think that there's just like not a very clear vision. Um, I think that like the fascist right has a very clear vision that is really regressive and bad, but it's powerful. And I think that those of us who are progressive on the left, liberal, or just any decent human being listening to this, uh, I think we should be able to voice a better vision for what men are and how that can be expansive. So I think that's part of what I want to be talking about today.
Yeah, yeah. I had the pleasure of being in a masculinity group with you, and on that place of like, what does it mean to be a man? I feel like that was one of the opening questions you had, and it was fascinating just hearing people kind of respond to it. And it's almost like that struggle of like, what is enough, or am I, like that. I think it felt like people were grappling with that, and there was something that you said, and just correct me if it is not like on point, but it was like, you know if you do it, then it's masculine or like, right? Like it's your expression of it. And I thought that that was really powerful. It was helpful, I think, when we kind of struggle with like the way that we want to wear masculinity, right? And like, is this right? Is this enough? And it's almost like that reassurance from each other of like, yeah, like it's a healthy expression. It's you and it's masculine if that's what you say it is. And I love that. I feel like we're in this space of competing visions right now in many different ways, right? And kind of what you were talking about with like traits of toxic masculinity, I've done workshops for people where it's like it's so easy to name some of those traits. And it's like, okay, so like let's talk about some healthy expressions of masculinity. And it's much harder for people to go there. So you've been grappling with that. I mean, you hold space, you've held these conversations starting out of self-interest and over time, right? Like you start to see some of these patterns and these trends. So I think it's really valuable for us just to kind of learn from you from kind of like collecting the many different voices and experiences that you've got to bear witness to over time. So I want to kind of jump into the Mark Zuckerberg, I opened up, recently calling for more masculine energy and a celebration of aggression in corporate America. And naturally, that sparked a lot of controversy and a lot of important conversations, I think. And he claimed that executive teams and boardrooms have become too feminine. So how do these comments reflect dominant culture and then specifically expected notions of what masculinity is, right? And then what are the potential consequences of this kind of mindset, both for individuals, right? But like thinking about, obviously we're talking about this in the context of the workplace. So like what are consequences there as well?
Thanks, Rose. I appreciate that question. Um, I want to start in what might seem like an unrelated place and talk about how much I hate the film Interstellar, Christopher Nolan's sci-fi movie. Um, and I hate it for not aesthetic reasons. I think it's gorgeous and a technical masterpiece. But messaging wise, I really think it's kind of related to what we're talking about here. In the movie, Earth is facing an advanced ecological collapse. And Matthew McConaughey's character is really sad and depressed and is also really upset that he's being asked by others to be a part of a caretaker generation. Um, and he yearns for an earlier time, when humans used to build things and, yearn for the stars. And, in the fiction of the film, and this is the, power and the danger of fiction, he gets to be right. He goes on this big adventure. He saves humanity by dying in outer space and somehow solves some intricate, obscure physics problem. And, then we watch the movie, and because the fiction says this is right, then we think, oh yeah, it's good to want to build things and not be a caretaker when people are asking us to. And I think this is dangerous because in real life, men with that mindset are destroying everything we love and everything we care about, and only care about maximizing profit at any cost.
Mhm.
And they think about themselves as heroes. And that brings me to what the movie got right, which is that we do have ecological collapse all around us, and the men in power refuse to be caretakers. Like that's the prescient vision, and that's kind of what we're dealing with. And so I talk about that as a roundabout way to say when Zuckerberg talks about masculine energy, um, I mean, one, it doesn't mean anything. It's one of those phrases where you can appeal to people by just appealing to something they think they like. Men want to feel masculine. And so if you tell them that the thing you're doing is masculine, it's a really easy way to kind of like get people on your side. But what he really wants is unfettered capitalism. He wants no accountability, and he doesn't want to be concerned about any human experience. And in the boardroom, in white collar offices, this means no thought to the working experiences of women or people of color or any other marginalized groups, if those folks are even hired anymore. In warehouses and factories, it means the relentless exploitation and surveillance of workers, defunding of all the organizations meant to support workers. And in our communities, especially in Black and working class communities, it means continuing to dump toxic waste in the drinking water and, pumping carbon dioxide into the air while destroying the agencies that would protect our public health. And, that's not hypothetical, that's happening right now.
Mhm.
And so, I think basically we need to call it out as this sort of verbal sleight of hand. He's taking everything he can for his own personal profit and saying, this is masculine. And I think like it's important to note that people in power right now are really good at poisoning and killing us while convincing key demographics that they're being done a favor. When you describe a lack of accountability as, quote, masculine energy and a celebration of aggression, you can win over aggrieved men and white people and anyone who thinks that, eggs are more expensive because of DEI. Even when, Zuckerberg is and people of his ilk are the ones who are actively jacking up the prices of eggs. It's not DEI, it's not anything else. um, and I think to get to the other part of your question about like how this relates to dominant narratives. um, like the problem is that capitalist wealth accumulation at any cost is our dominant culture. I think this is not just like from the messaging we get from corporate media and from people in charge. It's also what we see on Instagram. It's like what we see from influencers. We are a culture of accumulation and profit and personal growth right now. Um, and I think like fundamentally we have to be able to offer something better and offer a better vision to folks. And to be clear, I'm not like against reasonable amounts of wealth and comfort and safety and ability to have luxury. I think that is a really nice thing that we should have for everybody and could have for everybody if, we had a more equitable society. Um, but like more importantly, I think it's important for us to think about generally our culture and masculinity in particular to involve pursuing sustainable goals, to be more interested in community, knowledge, creative expression, connection with nature, to have passions that don't rely on infinite growth on a finite planet. Um, and I also just want to note that like on the same Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan's podcast is a terribly destructive force in the world right now. I'm thinking like just this last week, he had Elon Musk on, who talked about the dangers of empathy. And this is something that's happening in business spaces. This is something that's happening in political spaces and in Christian spaces too. There is an attack on the sheer act of caring about other people. Empathy is being, demonized. And I think we need to be able to counteract that and to offer empathy, not just as like a good thing, but as like the thing we should be driving for. Um, because I think like we need to be able to care about each other.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm reminded there's like I think a meme, like some blog post title that went around that was like, I don't know how to tell you that you should be caring about other people. And I guess what I want to say is like, we have to get past the not knowing. We have to be able to convince people that it's good to care about other people. Um, and I think there's one last thing I want to say here, which is that like, I mentioned earlier, self-interest is something that I think organizers and DEI practitioners should tap into. um, and I want to note that I think of self-interest as like a neutral tool, an energy source, and not an end into itself, because Zuckerberg is also very well, tapped into his self-interest. But it's his isolation at the top, his lack of accountability due to his wealth, that makes him so dangerous. So I think like when I'm talking about self-interest, I'm also talking about connecting our self-interest to the interests of others in our community. Because otherwise we abandon them and we betray our values as soon as we get our own needs met. And that's kind of um, what we're seeing from so many people right now, turning their backs on their communities and the people we maybe previously said we cared about and would
Yeah.
fight for. So
Okay. So one, thank you for listening to the Joe Rogan podcast just to share like what was said about empathy. My God. Okay. So that's a whole other thing. That could be a whole other podcast episode. So like just kind of connecting that though, like empathy and this concept of collective care and going back to like competing visions. Like I'm just thinking about different ways of thinking about moving into the future and the responsibility to that. And so like you're talking about this unfettered capitalism like from a US context, right? Like thinking about like quarterly profits, like getting to the next quarter, short-term thinking. And it's so different. Like if you look at like a strategic plan from a company like Mitsubishi, like a company in Asia, right? Like these are like 300 to 500 year business plans. And it has nothing to do with like kind of like quarterly gains or like what monetary value will kind of come to that company. It's more like who will we be to survive and how do we work together to get there? It's like a cultural document, right? And I would say there's an element of care to that. Of course, there's an angle of looking at profit, right? But like I I don't know. Like there's got to be something to that. But like there's a theme here of like empathy, the role of empathy, and viewing that perhaps maybe from Elon Musk's perspective. I don't know what's going on in his mind, but like that's not masculine. Or, so like I want to go into what you do in your group with the new masculinities group. So you facilitate new masculinities. It's a group up here in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm wondering, right, like to that example I shared earlier, where it's like people can quickly name those traits of toxic masculinity, but then you're like, okay, well, how do we wear masculinity in a more healthy way? So can you share some of those examples of maybe conversations that you all have been having about what healthy, inclusive masculinities look like in practice? And, like if conversations about how this shows up at work, and how that reflects your leadership, like if there's anything else you can add on that, I think that would be really, really helpful for us.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I think, yeah, getting to some concrete examples could be really a nice way to go. I'm curious, can I start with a little bit of a conceptual grounding, just because that's how
Yeah,
my brain works?
yeah,
Yeah.
please. Yeah.
So I think it's helpful for me, to start by saying toxic masculinity is not 100% overlap with masculinity. And I think that is the way that a lot of people's mind goes to when they hear the phrase. They hear toxic masculinity and they think, oh, you're saying masculinity is bad. And I think we need to be able to differentiate that if we want to win men over and say, no, there are these behaviors that are aligned with masculinity that are really harmful. But masculinity itself is not anything to be ashamed of. And I think it's helpful to kind of think about masculinity as like distinct from other kinds of dominant like political social status. For example, I talk about whiteness and white supremacy a lot. And when we talk about whiteness, we are talking about like a purely made up function of power and dominance and supremacy only. Like whiteness isn't real except in like the felt privilege and power that it lends the people who are considered white. But everyone who's considered white is in some way an underlying or has a like an underlying culture and ancestry. You have family and lineage and culture that is more real to who you are as opposed to whiteness, which is this power that has been bestowed upon you for the maintenance of white supremacist,
Mhm.
hierarchy in the US. Um, and the boundaries of whiteness are constantly shifting. I'm Jewish, and Jews weren't white for a while. Irish and Italian people weren't white, and so that sort of is constantly shifting. And I will say that gender and masculinity in particular also does shift. There are definitely porous boundaries. We can't really say, especially thanks to really wonderful like gender queer feminist theory. We can't say definitively like what is and is not masculine, what is and is not man, or at least we should be thoughtful and inquisitive and nuanced about that. But we also like know that there are those differences and they are real and felt. And like people who are masculine, people who are men, generally through reflection know that they are masculine or men. And people who are women or feminine know through reflection and expression that they are women or they are feminine. And sometimes that changes, but like we understand these as real concepts, even as they are socially constructed. And I think about it like a sort of ever woven tapestry of all these different like expressions, concepts, aesthetics, practices, all these things, performances. Um, but we understand that there are general trends to masculinity. and it's totally okay to align with them and find joy in them. And that's kind of like where I want to go. Um, I think like we need to start by saying that there are things that men can love about themselves as men, and not just like I am a man and I love myself for neutral reasons, but I really do think like you can love things about being a man. There are things about like, you know, largeness and taking up space and being direct and being able to like, lead a group and being really hairy all over your body. And these are things that like could be genderless, and also they might be gender affirming to people who are male or masculine or men. And so I think like it is a contradiction, and yet we can sort of recognize that when people say, I feel affirmed in my gender when I take on this behavior, we can just let them have that, I hope,
Yeah.
as long as it's not hurting other people. And so, like, I think uh, a couple things that I could think about in terms of just um, male expressions. Like I talk to men who like being protectors. They like being able to be sort of like a larger body that gets in the way of danger and protect, and is a barrier between others and the dangers of the world. There are men who like to, yeah, like when the moment calls, be a leader, get in front of the room, take up space. There are men who like to be, aggressive during sex when their partner wants that from them, and like that lets them feel like embodied. There are men who like to have really obscure esoteric hobbies, and get really weird and nerdy about them, and that feels very, I don't know, masculine in some ways. Um, and I think all of these things are like worthy pursuits. And if it lets someone feel like themselves and feel engendered in a positive way, I think we can encourage it. And I really just think the question is, are you doing it in a way that's helpful and not harmful? For example, thinking about like who are some of my favorite men right now. There is this guy on YouTube called, his name is Brian Lewis, and he is a Magic the Gathering YouTuber who goes by the name of the Tolarian Professor. His channel's called the Tolarian Community College. And his channel just raised $500,000 for Trans Lifeline, which is like an understanding of like solidarity to the trans community. I think this might be a stereotype that I think has some validity, which is that there's like a big trans contingent within the Magic the Gathering fandom. And I think it's like, he's this big, goofy, bearded guy who just loves this nerdy hobby. And it's like, that's what he's doing. He's getting really into this thing and he's sharing it with other people, and he's using it for, generating goodwill. And I think like other things, like, are you a man who feels like good and strong when you like flirt with people? Good. Like a lot of us are really sick of like the isolated, alienated, dating app age. And it's like, don't stop being yourself. Some people really like that, but just learn to read body language, learn to take cues, learn to take no for an answer. Like there are ways that we can be masculine in ways that have traditionally been assigned it, and still be good, like generous, interested, aware parts of society. And I'll stop there. I want to say I have other thoughts on like how to do this more in like an office setting, but I know I've been talking a lot, so I'll
No,
pause there.
I think those examples that you shared are really great. And there's a quote in there of like naming some of these traits that are associated with masculinity or men that are healthier expressions, and also acknowledging that these can be genderless as well. Like we can wear these regardless of how we relate to our own gender. And so I think that's really important. And you describe, you named that can be a contradiction at times too. So kind of thinking about men in the workplace and, recognizing we're celebrating Women's History Month. It's Trans Visibility Month. It's Gender Equality Month, right? It's, there's a lot of things that are happening right now where we're thinking about gender and we're relating it like maybe ourselves to this month and how we can participate. And I recognize like some people within my community struggle who are men where it's like, oh, well, we just have to be quiet and, we'll wait until after March to re-engage in the workplace. And it's like, no, like we play a role. And so, I'm curious for you, like if you were to encounter someone who's struggling with that, what might be some specific actions that you can encourage these guys to actively take to work alongside, right? Like to, like maybe using some power, but sharing some of that power alongside women or, people of different genders, right? So kind of curious what comes up for you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, to dive right in, I think professionally, the biggest things that I hear are one, men tend to take up too much space in meetings. Two, we tend not to ask questions or seek feedback from our teams, especially from women and other marginalized folks. Three, we tend to take credit for the work of others. And four, we tend to respond poorly to critical feedback. And that last one kind of continues to perpetuate all other bad behavior because if you're not willing to hear when someone wants to, push you in the right direction, then you're going to keep exacerbating all of your other behaviors. And I want to note that like none of those things is especially masculine. Like taking up too much space, like yeah, you know, filling your size is great, but like being too big isn't like the most masculine thing. Not being curious is not like a masculine thing. Being like defensive and refusing constructive feedback, I don't think that's very masculine. I think a lot of these things are about maturity more than they are about any kind of gender expression. And so I really think it's an easy way to start is just, to any men out there, listen more, respond to what you hear from people, make space for other people, give them credit for their work, and practice responding patiently and with curiosity when someone says something critical about you or your behavior. Because often when people reach out to you with feedback, they're doing you a favor and they're saying it because they trust that you'll hear it. And in my mind, all of those behaviors make you more of a man and more of a mature adult, not less of a man. Um, Another thing, and this is small, but I think it's huge, is that like I do hear that men are really rarely ever volunteering for the sort of quote unquote feminized and devalued, but still essential tasks in offices like taking notes in meetings. Men always want to lead, but never want to take notes. Helping to set up and break down events. Maybe volunteer your time just lifting boxes and cleaning up. Any admin aligned tasks that maybe you think are lesser than you, I would just encourage everyone to be a little bit more of a team player. I think that's like a really nice, simple way to start. And I have some other thoughts on just like how to maybe start to be an ally if you want to get into
Yeah,
that.
please. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like, if you are listening and you are a man who has this feeling of like, I want to be more of an ally to folks in my office, to folks who are not, men or maybe not cis or not straight. Um, I think the first thing that I would say is be ready to not be trusted right away.
Yeah.
I think folks have a lot of reason to be skeptical when someone shows up and says, I want to help you. Um, because there's a lot of proof that they've probably experienced in the past that folks don't stick around to help, that folks aren't actually committed, or folks stop being committed as soon as, they're given some amount of pushback. Um, and what I would say is like, if you are feeling scared to like reach out, make sure you have someone who already trusts you, who you can just kind of process this with. Because, I think it's good to be respectful to each other, but also you should understand that like if you're reaching out to strangers who have less power than you do politically and socially, it's good to just not rely on them to also make you feel good about, making that ask. But I would say just, do your due diligence, seek out available existing resources. Maybe does HR have existing survey data or other metrics that could give you a sense of what's going on at the office in terms of, demographics or in terms of like problems that people are aware are happening in your workplace? Have you done your basic reading about the experience of trans and cis women, non-binary folks, other gender expansive folks in the workplace? Like, do you know how to talk to people without offending them? Maybe do that before, engaging in dialogue and get a general sense. There's so much information. People want you to know what their experience is. You don't have to ask your coworker who's probably already busy with other projects. Um, and just like being aware of general news, like the Trump administration is a major threat to the existence of trans people right now. If you don't know about that, learn that before you start talking to trans people in your office, because they don't probably want to teach you because they got to do their jobs and worry about Trump at home.
Mhm.
Um, and also, like, look into if there are existing ERGs, employee resource groups at your workplace, because rather than reaching out to random folks belonging to a certain marginalized group, there are probably groups that do actively advocate for themselves and for each other in your workplace. Join the equity team if there is one, and even if you are not necessarily like directly a frontline community, show up and do things and see what's already happening, so that you go to the right place and are sort of ready to have that conversation. And yeah, I think like lastly, I think, well, two more things if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
Um, I guess one is like there's this concern that on one hand, like you want to do the thing that people actually want you to do. You want to like help in a way that is actually appreciated, and you don't want to, ask marginalized people to do labor for you. And I think a good balance is have an idea already of how you could support people in the office, but then be ready to hear alternate priorities from the people who are directly affected. So, maybe you think I think the women in this group in this office would appreciate if men had their own group that was like an accountability group where they were taking responsibility. Maybe go to the women's ERG and say, "Hey, I have this idea for this thing," but be willing to hear if they have like, "Actually, I'd rather you spent your energy on just like, I don't know, taking notes and cleaning up after we have our events," because men don't do that. Be ready to hear alternate takes. And the last thing is like lean on your own self-interest. I mean that. Like if you are a worker, if you're anyone other than the CEO, chances are that you need to be aligned with other folks in order to like have your needs as a worker met. And maybe you don't need childcare, but your colleague does, and maybe like the woman who's a single mother really needs your support right now, and maybe you'll become, a father or a parent later. We're all interconnected, and we all have like intertwined struggles. Some people feel it earlier and sooner and heavier, but like draw on what you are concerned about and use that as motivation to better your own life and better the lives of the people around you. And I'll stop there.
I love that. I feel like the response that you just gave is just like very concrete examples that, can be practiced year round, and particularly now, in this month of like really getting curious. And, there's a level, like I feel like this thread throughout what you're sharing, Adam, is like gaining greater self-awareness, right? And being open to, that feedback, which is a gift, right? If someone is bothering to share kind of how you might be impacting their experience in the workplace or beyond, they care enough about you to share that. Because think about how many people are just like, oh, not my problem, and move on, right? So there's a mirror, and there's a way that you can see how other people are experiencing you, and there's opportunities to shift and to change. And I think what you've offered is really, really powerful. So we'll do something with that, and make a nice quote for you that you can share with other people, because I think it's really, it sounds simple, right? But these small shifts can make, big change within the workplace and beyond. And so like with that, I kind of want to go to like our closing question, which is just what the show is about. The show is about having a vision. And you had mentioned earlier, it's like, what is our vision for healthier masculinities, right? And you've given us a glimpse. And so, as we kind of continue to peer into that future, I'd love for you to just kind of imagine like this world the world that we long for, the world that we want to win, and like kind of just think of your role of like the great work that you're doing, like the great leadership that you have of bringing men together to really go deep like go deep on a topic that, as you described, like can feel a little opaque, or it could be all of the above or none of the above, right? It's very it's based on experience. So, like what are you seeing in this future? Like full sensory level, what are you hearing? What are you tasting, etc. And how do you hope your leadership around new masculinities contributes to realizing that vision?
Yeah, I think so. I'm thinking about it in terms of like, there's this conversation a lot of you hear everywhere about the crisis of masculinity. And I think a lot of what that is from is this sort of um, idea that men are still raised to feel like they need to be the primary breadwinners, they need to be accomplished and, have uh, be able to provide for a family. And economically and globally speaking, it's just not possible anymore. A lot of the like well-paid working class jobs don't exist. Even the middle class jobs are disappearing and, can't support a whole family. And so we're left with a lot of like people who were given this promise of being able to just work a job and support people and feel like a provider, and that's not happening. And I think those folks are being won over by dangerous promises from right-wing fascists who are telling them actually it's, marginalized people's fault. And where I would love to see men go is seeing that in fact our futures are intertwined with everybody, and that we're being sold a raw deal. And so, part of what I would say is um, find a passion that's going to love you back. I think a lot of men get really obsessed with their jobs at places that are not actively taking care of them. Um, and one solution, if you do like your job and want to stay there, but it's not treating you well, is get aligned with your colleagues and unionize, or at very least organize in a less official way and advocate for each other's needs. Um, but beyond that, I think like a lot of men get really into like I said, esoteric hobbies that are kind of just like obsession with corporate brands.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not saying don't do that. I play video games. I like fantasy books. I play Dungeons and Dragons, which is now owned by Hasbro. Like, I'm not above that, and I think it's okay to have hobbies and passions. Like, we should enjoy our lives, please. But I think ultimately, like, these companies want our money. That's kind of their whole thing, and we should be finding passions and hobbies that will love us back. And what I mean by that is community, taking care of the planet, building systems that work for us and work for each other. Um, Feeding the hungry and helping to build systems of support for people around us, gardening and giving things you grow to the people in your community. Like, there are a lot of things that you can put your time and energy and love into that will make you feel fulfilled. We kind of just have to shift our priorities away from income and wealth. And again, I'm not against having enough to live comfortably. I'm against the idea that that will ever make us fully fulfilled and happy. We need to reorient toward each other, is basically what I'm saying. Um, yeah, and so I think like again, thinking about self-interest and combining ours with other people, I believe in a future where men exist for themselves and for others in their communities. We don't have to choose one or the other. Um, I imagine a masculinity that encourages men to use their strength, use their power, their forwardness, resolve, in order to fight for everyone's well-being. And you don't have to give up the things you love about being a man. You don't have to stop being powerful. It's about using the things you love about yourself toward creativity and community justice, rather than the current trajectory, which is all destruction and domination. Um, I also just want to point out that like a lot of men currently and even women currently are like turned off by feminism. But I want to be clear that like beyond the like maybe less productive parts of pop feminism for recent years, like beyond the slogan "Men are trash," beyond the male tears coffee mugs, like um feminism is invested in our best interests as men. Most feminists want us to have full access to our emotions. They want us to know how to express ourselves. and have safe, happy, fulfilling social and romantic lives. They want us to be and feel less isolated. They want us to have great sex where our partners feel as fulfilled as we do afterward. Um, Intersectional feminism has a ton to offer, has already offered us a lot. And I think our job now is to kind of take what they have done and run with it, to be more introspective, to be more connecting with other men, to be more exploratory and thoughtful and connected with other men, to generate a future where like we recognize that all of us are intertwined.
Yeah.
And I think, to close, I was returning to like one of the passages, a section from a Rebecca Solnit essay that I think kind of inspired me to start this group in the first place when I read it in 2016. This is from one of her essays in Men Explain Things to Me. Um, Quote, I think the future of something we may no longer call feminism must include a deeper inquiry into men. Feminism sought and seeks to change the whole human world. Many men are on board with this project, but how it benefits men and in what ways the status quo damages men as well could bear far more thought. As could an inquiry into the men perpetrating most of the violence, the threats, the hatred, and the culture that encourages them. So, you know, if you don't want to be seen as toxic or harmful, one, do something about it and hold other men in your community accountable. And two, you don't have to give up yourself or the things you love about yourself. It's about being thoughtful and exploratory and expansive about who you are. And it's about tying your values to and your needs to those of the people around you. And that's how we'll keep this going.
I love that. I love that vision, Adam. And I really enjoy talking with you. So I'm just going to leave that there. Not much more to add on, but a really beautiful vision for what's possible, right? Competing visions. And, I'm excited to hear from other folks in terms of what how they're kind of like integrating some of what you've shared, and definitely like some of those concrete actions, getting that out for men who want to get more involved in the workplace and certainly beyond. So thank you so much. What's the best place for people to find you, like website, where they can find your work?
Yeah, so you can email me directly, adamjacobsiegel@gmail.com. Um, you can follow the New Masculinities Instagram. I believe it's just New Masculinities Group. If you find it, that'll be there. Yeah, I'm double checking. Yes, it is just New Masculinities Group is the Instagram tag. And I have a website, adamjsiegel.com. I don't update it as often as I want to, but I have a lot of information there and also have a lot of links and resources if you want to look into some of the essays and thoughts and books that inspired some of these thoughts. So yeah,
Cool. All right. So we will include some of those links in our show notes. So for listeners, please check those out. And for now, for folks who have tuned in live, thank you. Thanks for being here. And if you want to check more of the Imagine Belonging podcast, you can just go to rhodesperry.com and find all of that there. So for now, we have a new vision for new masculinity. So Adam, thank you. And thanks for everyone for growing the belonging movement. We'll be back in 2 weeks. So excited to see you then. All right, take care. Bye.